Are you tired of feeling like nothing in Britain works anymore? The endless wait for a doctor's appointment, the struggling NHS, the feeling that government is just too slow to solve real problems? Well, you're not alone. And what's really shocking is that both Keir Starmer and, yes, even Liz Truss seem to agree on why. But can they actually fix it? That's the billion-dollar question we're tackling today. Prepare for some uncomfortable truths and surprising solutions. This is going to be a wild ride. Let's dive right in. Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, has been making some pretty strong statements about the state of the British government. He says it's become overcautious and flabby. Government has gotten bigger, but weaker. By weaker, he means a growing inability to actually make things happen. He points to the explosion of arm's-length bodies. These are taxpayer-funded organizations that are supposed to be independent from the government, but often end up creating more bureaucracy and slowing things down. He even wrote in the Daily Telegraph about these quangos, these regulators, blocking the government. It's a pretty damning assessment, right? But here's where things get really interesting. Now, let's rewind a bit. Remember Liz Truss? The former prime minister who had that short, tumultuous run in Downing Street? Well, after her time in government, she also had some pretty strong opinions about why things weren't working. She talked about the tyranny of the technocracy, the power of the administrative state. She argued that Blair and Brown had created a web of legalistic architecture that put too much power in the hands of these technocrats. Sound familiar? It should. Because despite their obvious political differences, Starmer and Truss are singing from almost the same hymn sheet when it comes to diagnosing the problems plaguing British government. This is where we start to see the surprising alignment. It's like finding out your biggest political rivals agree on the root cause of a major issue. What does this mean? What's the common ground? The common ground, it seems, is those arm's-length bodies, those quangos. Starmer is calling for a bonfire of the quangos, a major shakeup of regulators. He says politicians have been hiding behind them, creating a cottage industry of checkers and blockers. And Truss, well, she basically said the same thing, just in her own, slightly more fiery way. Consider the Sentencing Council in England and Wales. Truss pointed to it as an example of a body that hinders ministers from doing what they want. Ironically, it was set up under Gordon Brown, a Labour Prime Minister. This highlights the fact that both parties have, at different times, contributed to the problem. It's not a partisan issue, it's a systemic one. So, what's the big deal with these quangos anyway? Why are they such a problem? The problem with these arm's-length bodies is that they often create layers of bureaucracy, duplication of effort, and a lack of accountability. They can become self-serving, prioritizing their own survival and expansion over the needs of the public. They can also make it difficult for ministers to implement their policies, as they have to navigate a complex web of regulations and approvals. Think of it like this. Imagine trying to build a house, but you have to get permission from a dozen different committees, each with its own set of rules and priorities. It would take forever, and you'd probably end up with a house that no one actually wanted. That's kind of what's happening with the British government right now. And it's not just about the money, although the cost of these quangos is significant. It's about the time, the energy, and the frustration that they generate. It's about the feeling that nothing ever gets done. But let's face it, even Starmer's government has created new arm's-length bodies, like GB Energy and Skills England. Is there a hypocrisy here? It's a fair question. Why is Starmer criticizing quangos when his own government is creating new ones? Well, he might argue that his quangos are different, that they're more efficient, more accountable, more aligned with his priorities. But the truth is, it's probably just human nature. Your own creations always seem less problematic than someone else's. This is a classic case of not invented here syndrome. But regardless of the motivations, the fact remains that the proliferation of quangos is a problem that needs to be addressed. And Starmer seems to recognize that, even if he's not entirely consistent in his approach. So what's the solution? How do we fix this mess? Starmer's plan, as far as we can tell, involves streamlining these organizations, reducing their number, and bringing them more directly under the control of ministers. He's already announced plans to scrap NHS England, the world's largest quango, and bring its functions back into the Department of Health. This is a pretty bold move, and it's likely to be controversial, but it signals a clear intention to take back control and reduce bureaucracy. Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has made it clear he feels the same way, saying that NHS England was on borrowed time. The goal is to reduce duplication, improve efficiency, and make the health service more accountable to the government. But it's not just about the NHS. Starmer wants to apply this same approach to other areas of government, identifying quangos that are no longer fit for purpose and either abolishing them or reforming them. This requires a fundamental shift in mindset, a willingness to challenge the status quo, and a commitment to putting the needs of the public first. But is it enough? What are the potential pitfalls? One of the biggest risks with any major government reform is unintended consequences. You might think you're simplifying things, but you could end up creating even more bureaucracy or making things even less efficient. Remember Andrew Lansley's NHS reforms? They created NHS England in the first place to free the health service from political meddling. It's a constant push and pull between control and independence. There's also the risk of political interference. If ministers have too much control over these organizations, they could use them for political purposes rather than for the benefit of the public. And then there's the issue of expertise. These arm's-length bodies often have specialized knowledge and skills that the government doesn't possess. If you abolish them or bring them too closely under government control, you could lose that expertise. So it's a delicate balancing act. You need to streamline and improve efficiency, but you also need to preserve expertise and avoid political interference. It's a tough challenge, but it's one that Starmer seems determined to tackle. But what about the bigger picture? Is this just about fixing bureaucracy, or is there something more at stake? Ultimately, this is about restoring public trust in government. People are tired of feeling like nothing works, like the system is rigged against them. They want to see a government that is efficient, accountable, and responsive to their needs. And Starmer seems to understand that. He knows that if he wants to win the next election, he needs to convince people that he can actually fix what's broken. That's why he's talking about government reform, about slashing bureaucracy, about making things work again. But it's not just about winning the election. It's about building a better future for Britain. A future where people can access the services they need, where businesses can thrive, and where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. That's the promise that Starmer is making, and it's a promise that he needs to deliver on. But let's keep in mind what Sir Nick Carter, the former head of the UK Armed Forces, said about the UK Armed Forces being remarkably hollow after a process of neglect over a 30-year period. Can Starmer fix everything at once? The challenge ahead for Starmer is immense. He has to navigate a complex political landscape, overcome entrenched interests, and deliver tangible results. And he has to do it all while facing a skeptical public and a relentless opposition. But he also has a unique opportunity. He has the chance to break the cycle of government inefficiency and restore public trust. He has the chance to build a better future for Britain. And he has the support of a significant portion of the population who are desperate for change. Whether he succeeds or fails will depend on his ability to lead, to compromise, and to deliver on his promises. And it will depend on whether he can learn from the mistakes of the past, including the mistakes of Liz Truss. Because despite their political differences, they both seem to agree on the problem. The question is, can they agree on the solution? And more importantly, can they actually implement it? These are the questions that will define Starmer's premiership. And these are the questions that we'll be watching closely in the months and years to come. Now, what do you think? Can Starmer actually fix what's broken? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth analysis of the biggest issues facing Britain today.